Hello friends. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The mountain air had a bite to it that morning. That sharp, thin kind of cold that seeps into your bones, even when the sun's still out. I'd been driving north all day, deeper into the Blue Range wilderness, chasing solitude like it was something I could finally catch. After the divorce, I'd started convincing myself that isolation might be the cure for everything. The silence, the pain, the emptiness. So when the fall season rolled in, I packed up all the shiny new gear I'd been wasting money on and told myself I'd take one last trip before the snow came. Just me, the trail, and a weekend of quiet. The ranger at the outpost had said the upper road was in rough shape. Most folks don't go that far this time of year, he'd warned, but that was exactly what I wanted to hear. By the time I reached the trailhead, the parking area was completely empty, except for my dusty Tacoma and a rusted white van tucked halfway behind the trees. No plates on the front, just mud-spattered paint and an open back door. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. I loaded my pack, locked up, and started down the trail before the light faded. The path wound through long stretches of pine and birch. No cell service. No sounds, except the crunch of my boots and the wind brushing through branches. That first day went better than expected. I pushed nearly 15 miles into the backcountry before finding a flat patch near a small stream where I could set up for the night. The water ran clear over smooth granite, perfect for filtering. The place felt untouched, peaceful. I spent an hour hanging my hammock between two pines, testing my new stove, setting my food bag on a bear line. By dusk, I had a small fire going, just enough to watch the sparks twist into the dark. For the first time in months, I actually felt okay, maybe even content. Then, right before turning in, I noticed something that felt wrong. Subtle, but wrong. About 10 feet from my camp, someone had stacked a few river stones in a neat little triangle, perfectly balanced, points aligned toward the creek. I thought maybe it was just some leftover thing from another camper, so I kicked it apart and didn't think about it again. At least not until I found the second one. It was maybe 30 yards out. Same triangle, same alignment, same care. My stomach sank as I scanned the dark around me. There were no other camps nearby. I hadn't seen a single footprint the entire hike in. I told myself it had to be random, some wilderness art thing or an animal marking. Anything but what it actually meant. I turned in early, but sleep didn't come easy. The forest out here is never completely silent. Every shift of wind sounds like footsteps when you're alone. Sometime around midnight, I heard movement. Soft, deliberate. Not the skitter of a raccoon or the rustle of deer hooves. It was measured. Human. I sat up in the hammock, knife in hand, holding my breath. The sound stopped. Then, after a long pause, came the whistle. 3 rising notes, faint and distant. It didn't sound like an animal call. It was too even, too controlled. I waited, heart pounding. Then, from the opposite direction, a second whistle answered. Same pitch, same rhythm. They were signaling each other. I told myself to stay calm, that maybe it was hunters using calls to track each other in the dark. But there were no lights, no flashlights, no voices. Just those slow, patient whistles drifting through the trees. And then, silence. I lay there for hours, wide awake, gripping my knife until my hand cramped. When dawn finally came, I packed up fast. I didn't even make breakfast. I just wanted distance. I followed the creek north, planning to loop back toward the main trail. After maybe half a mile, I stopped for water, and that's when I saw them. Boot prints. 2 sets. They weren't mine. Smaller, sharper tread, military style. They'd come from the direction of my camp, followed the creek and turned uphill. I stared at them for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed the fresh rock formation by the bank. 4 stones this time, set in a square with one in the middle. The pattern felt deliberate, methodical, like someone was marking territory. That's when I realized these weren't random hikers. Someone had followed me out here. By midday, the wind had picked up and the temperature dropped fast. The forest felt different now, tense, like it was holding its breath. Every sound carried farther than it should have. I didn't stop again until I reached a small clearing where the trees thinned enough to get a bit of sunlight. I was shaking, partly from cold, partly from whatever was building inside me. That's when my phone buzzed. Just 1 bar flickering, enough to show a message notification. It was from an unknown number. "Nice setup. You forgot your stove," I froze. I hadn't told anyone where I was camping, not even my sister, who usually tracked my trips. I tried calling 911 anyway, but the signal died instantly. I stared at the trees, scanning for movement. Nothing but stillness. I packed everything and started moving again. This time without any plan, except to get back to the truck before dark. But the forest wasn't empty anymore. Every few minutes, I'd hear something. A branch snap, a whisper of fabric, faint steps pacing just beyond view. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it followed. At one point, I caught sight of a figure about 50 yards off, a shape between the trees, too still to be animal, too large to mistake. Just standing there, watching. I didn't stick around to study it. The sun was gone before I realized how far I'd wandered off trail. My GPS showed a rough direction back to the road, but I must have veered miles off the main route. I decided to set a small fire, just enough for light and warmth, and stay put until sunrise. I built a perimeter of noise traps, empty cans on paracord tied between branches, little alarms that might give me a second of warning. The fire cracked quietly as I sat there clutching the knife, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I heard the owl call. Clear. Perfect. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? But barred owls don't live out here. Another call came a few seconds later, closer, and another, farther off to my right. It was the same tone, same pitch, exactly the same, like a recording. They were communicating again. Then came the whistle, the same 3 notes as before, drawn out, confident, and a voice. Faint, male, calm. Still awake? I stood up fast, scanning the dark with the flashlight. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just the echo of that voice, somewhere beyond the trees. Still awake? This time it came from the other side. They were circling me. I killed the fire, grabbed my pack, and ran. No light, no sound except my own breathing. The darkness swallowed everything. I followed the slope downhill, hoping it would lead to the access road. My legs burned, my lungs stung, and still, behind me, I could hear movement. Fast, heavy, deliberate. At one point, I tripped over a fallen log and slid through pine needles, scraping my hands raw. When I looked back, a faint glow flickered between the trunks, a flashlight beam sweeping side to side. I crawled into a ditch and lay flat, pressing my face into the cold dirt. Footsteps passed, maybe 20 yards away. Someone whistled again, slower this time, then laughed. That low, almost amused kind of laugh that sounds like someone enjoying a game. I stayed there until the forest went silent again. When I finally moved, I headed toward the faint hum of water. the creek. If I followed it downstream, it would eventually lead near the road. Hours passed. The moon disappeared behind clouds, and the darkness turned absolute. Then I heard it, barking. A dog, deep and rhythmic, getting closer. They had dogs now. I waded straight into the creek to mask my scent, following it knee-deep through the freezing water. My legs went numb, but it was the only way. At one bend, I climbed out and crouched low behind a cluster of deadfall, massive trunks tangled like a barrier. From there, I could see faint lights moving through the forest. 3, maybe 4 of them. Voices, too. Low, casual, like men chatting around a campfire. One said, "He'll get tired soon." Another laughed softly. "They always do." I bit down hard on my glove to keep from making a sound. They were searching methodically, sweeping, waiting, listening. Like this wasn't the first time they'd done it. At some point, the dog barked again, excited, then silence. I took the chance and moved, quietly, slowly, until I was far enough to risk turning on my phone again. Battery, 58%. Signal, none. But the GPS pinged my last known coordinates, just over 18 miles from the road. I could make it if I didn't stop. I switched the phone off to save power and started walking again. By the time dawn came, my clothes were soaked, and every muscle screamed for rest. The forest thinned slightly, revealing a ridge overlooking the valley. From there, I saw it, the dirt road cutting through the trees, and parked at the bend. My truck. And next to it, the white van. Same one from the trailhead. Doors closed now. No one visible. I stayed hidden, watching for movement. After 10 minutes of silence, I took my chance. Slid down the ridge, keeping low, running only when the trees gave cover. When I reached the truck, I unlocked it with shaking hands, climbed in, and slammed the doors. The keys were still in my pocket. The engine roared to life. I reversed out so fast I nearly hit a stump, tires spitting gravel as I shot down the mountain road. Every curve felt like it could throw me off, but I didn't care. I didn't stop until I hit asphalt. Then I drove straight into the next town. A single main street, gas station, diner, and a sheriff's substation next to the post office. I must have looked insane walking in there. Clothes ripped, mud up to my knees, eyes wild. The deputy on duty, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, gave me a cup of water while I told him everything. The stones, the whistles, the message, the van. He nodded, calm, took a few notes, then asked for my phone. When I showed it to him, the text message was gone. No trace in my inbox or logs. He radioed a patrol up to the trailhead. They found nothing. No van, no footprints, no gear, not even the remains of my fire. Just an empty forest. The report they filed said, possible misinterpretation during prolonged isolation. That's official talk for you, imagined it. I tried to let it go. But 3 weeks later, the news broke about another missing hiker. A man from Oregon, early 40s, solo camper, last seen entering the same wilderness area. His car was found near that same trailhead. Nothing else. I still dream about the whistles sometimes. I'll be in bed, drifting towards sleep, and somewhere in the distance, faint, deliberate, I'll hear those 3 rising notes, and every time I remember what one of those men said in the dark. They always get tired. Maybe that's their ritual. Maybe that's their sport. Maybe somewhere in those mountains, there's another triangle of stones waiting for whoever comes next. I stopped at the Maple Creek Gas and Diner just after sunrise, the kind of small-town place where the coffee tastes like burnt toast, and the locals all look up when a stranger walks in. I'd been driving through the northern ridge trails for work that week, environmental survey stuff, when I saw the flyers taped to every window, pole, and lamppost. A missing child. 8-year-old Lily Patterson, last seen near her family's campsite 3 days ago. The picture on the flyer hit me harder than I expected. She had a crooked smile, one front tooth missing, and a pink headband holding back a tangle of brown hair. I didn't have kids myself, but something about that face, innocent and hopeful, made my stomach tighten. The woman at the counter noticed me staring. "You heading up to the park?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Near Maple Creek Ridge." She sighed, shaking her head. "That's where they're searching today. You can sign up at the fire station if you've got a few hours." I don't know what made me say yes. Maybe guilt. Maybe the thought of that little girl alone out there. So, after finishing my coffee, I drove straight to the volunteer center. The Maple Ridge Fire Station was chaos. Radios blaring, maps spread across tables, people in neon vests pacing around. They didn't ask many questions, just checked my ID, handed me an orange vest, and scribbled my name on a clipboard. Team 6, the coordinator said. North Sector. 2 miles from the Patterson campsite. Our team leader was a retired park ranger named Walt Jeffers. Gray beard, sunburned nose, the kind of man who looked like he'd been carved out of the mountains themselves. "Stay in line," he told us. "Call out her name every 20 yards. Keep each other in sight. You hear anything? Whistle twice. You see anything? Don't touch it. Flag it." Our group had 5 people. Walt, me, a young couple named Diane and Mark, and a local college student named Eli, who clearly didn't want to be there. He kept looking at his phone until Walt barked at him to save his battery. We started up the trail around 10 a.m. The forest was dense. Tall pine, red oak, and patches of moss-covered stone. Even in full daylight, the air under those trees felt muted, like the world was holding its breath. For hours, we trudged through undergrowth, shouting Lily's name until our throats ached. Birds scattered. Insects hummed. The sun burned straight above, and the air grew thick with humidity. Finally, around 2 in the afternoon, Walt called for a break near an old logging road. We sat on fallen logs, drinking water in silence. That's when I heard it. Faint, fragile, a child crying. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks. The sound came in waves, thin but clear, sobbing, high-pitched, desperate. "Walt," I whispered. "You hear that?" He froze, listening. Then, very faintly, the others heard it too. A little girl's voice, crying for help. The sound came from somewhere up the ridge, maybe a few hundred yards northeast. Eli's face went pale. "That's her, right?" "That's gotta be her." Walt grabbed his radio. "Search command. This is Team 6. We have possible auditory contact. North Ridge." Static. Nothing but static. He tried again, adjusted the frequency. Still nothing. The crying grew louder, then softer, then louder again, like she was moving. I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm going up there," I said, already standing. Walt reached for me. "Protocol says we don't split up." But the sound of that little girl pleading tore right through me. Diane had tears in her eyes. "We can't just sit here." Walt hesitated. "All right. But mark your path and yell if you see anything. I'll try to get the others on the radio." I nodded, already climbing. The slope was steeper than it looked. The ground was loose shale and tangled roots that snagged my boots. I kept calling out, "Lily! It's okay! We're here to help!" But the crying kept shifting, sometimes just ahead, sometimes off to the side. After 20 minutes, the sounds of my team faded behind me. The forest grew silent except for that voice. "Help! Mommy, please!" My pulse hammered. Finally, I reached a small clearing near the top. The sunlight broke through the trees in thin streaks, and in the middle of the clearing sat a blue camping tent. Old, weathered, half collapsed. The crying was coming from inside. "Lily," I said softly. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." The crying stopped. Dead silence. No birds. No wind. I stepped closer. The grass around the tent was flattened in a perfect ring, as if someone, or several people, had been pacing around it. The zipper hung halfway open. Inside it was dark. My hands were shaking as I crouched down and pulled it open. Inside, on top of a rumpled sleeping bag, was a two-way radio, its green light blinking faintly. The crying was coming from its speaker. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I picked it up, and the sobbing looped again. Same rhythm, same breaths, same words. It wasn't live. It was a recording. Someone had recorded a child crying and set the radio to play it on repeat. My stomach turned to ice. I turned the radio over. There was something taped to the back, a folded piece of paper. My name was written on it, not my full name. Just Evan, in careful printed letters. I froze. Nobody here knew my name. I hadn't told anyone except the coordinator at the fire station. With trembling hands, I peeled the tape and opened the note. 5 words. "You shouldn't have come alone." I stumbled backward, heart slamming in my chest. Then, a branch snapped behind me, close. I turned, scanning the tree line. Shadows. Dense green. Nothing moved. Another snap, this time to my left. Whoever it was, they were circling. I dropped the radio. It hit the dirt with a dull thud, still playing that endless looping cry. My phone had no signal. The forest swallowed everything. The sound, the air, my breath. Then I noticed the footprints, fresh. They circled the tent in wide arcs, larger than mine, heavy. Deep impressions from boots. Some led out of the trees, others led in. I felt watched, not imagined, known. Something brushed through the branches to my right. Not an animal. Too deliberate? That was all it took. I turned and ran. I tore through the underbrush, sliding on loose dirt, ducking under branches. The crying faded behind me, replaced by the rhythm of my own breathing. But then, footsteps. Measured. Slow. Not chasing me, but following. Deliberate. Confident. They knew the forest better than I did. I crashed downhill, gasping, branches whipping my face. I caught my foot on a root and went sprawling. Pain shot through my ribs. The world tilted, blurry and green. For a few seconds, all I heard was my pulse and those footsteps crunching through leaves. Then, faintly, "Evan!" It was Walt's voice. "Over here!" I screamed. "Someone's following me!" The footsteps behind me stopped, completely. I scrambled to my feet and half ran, half fell down the ridge until I saw orange vests through the trees. Walt and Eli were climbing toward me, shouting. I collapsed into Walt's arms, gasping out what happened. "The tent! Radio! Recording! My name!" He looked up the ridge, scanning the trees. But there was nothing. Only the wind whispering through the leaves. "Let's get out of here," he said quietly. The sheriff's department cordoned off the area. They found the tent exactly where I said. The radio was still looping when they arrived. They photographed everything, bagged the note, took plaster casts of the footprints. No fingerprints, no usable DNA. The boots, they said, were military grade. But no one in the search teams wore anything like that. A detective, a woman named Catherine Ward, told me they'd increase patrols and check nearby cabins. But her eyes said something else. She didn't believe me about the footsteps. They found Lily 2 days later, alive. She'd wandered into a drainage culvert and been too scared to respond when people called her name. Everyone celebrated. The town had its miracle. But I couldn't shake what happened up there, because whoever set that trap Whoever recorded those cries and wrote my name wasn't looking for Lily. They were looking for me. Or people like me. Someone who'd go alone when they heard a child in pain. It's been 7 months. I moved apartments, changed my number, bought cameras for every corner of my house. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night through quiet stretches of highway, my radio crackles on its own, and faintly, under the static, I swear I can still hear her crying. My friend Hannah had been bugging me for weeks to take a break from the city. She said my job was draining the life out of me. The endless office lights, the honking traffic, the gray repetition of everything. Her cousin, Ryan, was planning a weekend fishing trip along Coldwater Creek, up near the base of the Siskiyou Mountains in Oregon. Crystal clear water, 0 cell signal, just trees and sky, she said. I hesitated for days, but when Saturday rolled around, I gave in. We met at dawn outside a tiny cafe off Highway 97. Ryan was already there. Tall, quiet guy with that mountain man kind of calm. He spread a creased topographic map over the hood of his pickup, tracing his finger along winding blue lines. "This stretch here," he said, tapping a curve in the river. "The trout bite like crazy this time of year." He said his grandfather had taught him those waters, that they fished there every November when the fog rolled low and the air carried that metallic chill. I wasn't much of a fisherman, but I liked the idea of quiet. I packed light, a thermos of coffee, a flashlight, my old tackle box that still smelled faintly of river mud from years ago. By the time we reached the ranger station parking lot 2 hours later, the sun was low behind the ridgeline. We wouldn't have much daylight to find a spot. Ryan suggested splitting up to scout before dark. He pointed to the left, where a faint path disappeared between ferns and cedar. "That's the deeper channel," he said. He handed Hannah the middle trail, the one that hugged the riverbank. Then he nodded at me to check a narrow game trail veering right through the alder trees. He pressed a silver whistle into my hand. "3 sharp blows if you find something good," he said. 4 if you're in trouble." He smiled like it was a joke, but I noticed he didn't laugh. We agreed to meet back in 10 minutes. The trail I took was barely a path, just damp soil and broken leaves under my boots. It wound through young trees that grew too close together, their pale bark catching the last light. I could hear the creek somewhere nearby, that rushing, rhythmic sound of moving water, but I couldn't see it through the undergrowth. After a while, the woods opened into a small clearing. There was an old fire ring built from flat river stones, its ashes scattered and gray. A few crushed beer cans sat half buried in the dirt, probably left by fishermen earlier in the season. I knelt down and brushed my fingers through the ashes. Cold. Long dead. As I turned to leave, something bright caught my eye. Sitting perfectly upright on a mossy stump a few feet off the trail was Ryan's thermos. The same stainless steel one he'd been drinking from an hour ago, covered in stickers from national parks. It wasn't dropped. It wasn't kicked over. It was placed there, dead center on the stump, like someone wanted it to be found. I picked it up. It was empty. The lid screwed tight. I looked around, half expecting Ryan to jump out and say he'd left it as a marker. But the woods were silent except for the low hum of water and a distant crow calling somewhere uphill. I thought maybe he'd come this way before, maybe checked this trail earlier in the day. Still, the way it sat there, it didn't feel right. I started to turn back when something red caught my eye hanging from a branch. It was Hannah's bandana, the one she always wore tied around her ponytail. It was knotted carefully around the branch, positioned at eye level. The knot was too deliberate, the fabric clean, no sign of having fallen. The bark beneath it had been stripped, like someone had tied and retied it to get it perfect. That's when a strange feeling crept in. That sense you get when you realize you've been led somewhere. I called out her name. "Hannah." No answer. Just wind in the branches. I blew the whistle once. Nothing. The second time, my sound echoed through the trees, bouncing off invisible walls. Then faintly, I heard a whistle back. 3 short blasts, our signal for found something. It came from deeper in the woods, not from where I'd come. Relieved, I started toward the sound. The trees thinned out near a slope where the ground dropped toward the river. Through the gaps, I could finally see the water, silver and glassy under the dusk. The bank below was rocky, with enough space for a couple of tents. Perfect fishing spot. But halfway down the slope, I stopped cold. Because sitting in the sand below were 2 backpacks, Hannah's bright green one and Ryan's dark blue, propped side by side like display pieces. Their straps were buckled, their zippers closed, and there were no footprints leading to or away from them. The only marks in the sand were 3 deep impressions, like someone had stood there for a long time without moving. I climbed down and crouched beside the bags. Ryan's still had his knife sheathed on the side, his extra reel inside. Hannah's had her jacket rolled neatly on top. Everything looked untouched. That's when I noticed the boot prints. Not theirs. These were bigger, heavier, with a wide tread pattern. They led from the tree line to a fallen log overlooking the water and stopped. I followed them slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. At the log, I found a cigarette butt half buried in the damp sand. Then another. Then 4 more, lined up perfectly along the wood like a row of markers. Someone had been watching. I turned to scan the trees. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no insects, just the steady pulse of the creek and my own shallow breathing. Then, a faint sound, the crack of a twig behind me. I froze. Another step, soft, deliberate. Whoever it was had been following my exact trail, keeping distance, waiting for me to find each clue. I didn't think. I just moved, quick but quiet, up the hill and back toward where we'd split. But each time I stopped, the forest went still too. It was like we were playing that same horrible children's game. Move and it moves. Stop and it stops. At one point, I caught sight of a shape between the trees. Too far to see details, just the outline of a man. Still, watching. I thought about blowing the whistle, but it felt like an invitation. Instead, I cut right, pushing through dense brush until I reached the edge of the creek again. I figured if I followed the water upstream, I'd eventually hit the parking lot or a landmark. But before I could take another step, a whistle echoed through the trees again. 3 short blasts, then silence. Then one long, low note, a sound that didn't belong to any of us. That's when I ran. The sky had gone purple by the time I reached a bend in the creek. The water here slowed, deep and black like glass. Across the river, I saw something bright, a flash of blue nylon. It was a tarp, strung between 2 trees. Under it, I could make out shapes, 2 people sitting against a boulder. Ryan and Hannah. I called out their names, stumbling into the shallows. They didn't answer. When I got closer, I realized why. Their hands were zip-tied, duct tape across their mouths. Their eyes were wide, and not looking at me, but past me. I turned just as I heard a step behind me on the gravel. A man stood there, not far, maybe 15 feet away. He was older, his beard gray, wearing forest green camo and a faded orange hunting cap. A camera hung from his neck, the lens capped but ready. He didn't speak, didn't raise the camera, just stared at me, like I'd ruined something. I grabbed Ryan's knife from the sand and sliced Hannah's zip ties first. She tore the tape off, gasping. "He was taking pictures of us," she said, voice trembling. "Everywhere we went. He was just..." I didn't let her finish. I cut Ryan free, and we started backing toward the water. The man didn't move. He just watched. Then, as quietly as he'd appeared, he stepped backward, disappearing behind the trees. We didn't wait. We ran. Upstream, through the water, crashing through reeds and mud. When we reached the main trail again, the forest finally came alive with sound, the kind that only comes when danger moves away. By the time we reached the parking lot, the last light had faded. Ryan's truck sat where we'd left it, my car beside it. But now, at the far end of the lot, was an old brown van, its windows blacked out, license plate caked in mud. We didn't check it. We just drove. The ranger station was closed when we got there, so we drove straight to the sheriff's office in Klamath Falls. The deputy listened, took notes, sent 2 units back up the mountain. By the time they arrived, the van was gone. No campsite, no footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Just cigarette butts in the dirt near the riverbank. A few weeks later, a ranger called Ryan. They'd found an abandoned camp deeper in the forest, about 2 miles from where we'd been. Pinned to the trees were dozens of photographs, all different hikers, different groups, different faces. None of us were in them. But every photo was taken from the same kind of distance, hidden behind brush, from high ridges, through gaps in trees. Whoever he wasn't after us specifically. We just wandered into his routine. Sometimes, I still dream of that night. The cold air off the creek, the pale reflection of the sky and the water, and that man standing on the opposite bank, silent, the camera hanging from his neck like an unfinished sentence. I still wonder what those 5 cigarette butts meant, what he was counting, how long he watched before we ever noticed, and what would have happened if I'd never picked up that whistle. My first rifle didn't come from a store shelf. It came from my father's hands, wrapped in an old canvas case, smelling faintly of gun oil and pine. I was 13 then, standing in our backyard in West Virginia, as he told me that every man should learn how to take a life only if he understands what it means to end one. That lesson stuck with me longer than any bullet ever could. For the next 10 years, every November without fail, Dad and I drove out to the high ridges of Dawson Hollow, a quiet stretch of mountain woods near the Virginia border, where his friend, old Mr. Lambert, owned 300 acres of hunting land. Lambert had long since moved to Oregon, but he still let Dad use the place each season, said as long as we respected the property and left it cleaner than we found it. We were welcome. It became our tradition. A sacred one. No phones, no other people, just us, the cold air, and the forest. This year, Dad said it'd probably be our last hunt together. His knees were bad, his breathing slower. He turned 61 that spring, but still insisted he could out-hike men half his age. I didn't argue. The truth was, I wanted one more trip too, before life pulled us both in different directions. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, late autumn light slicing through the tree line as we parked the old Chevy by the creek bend. The truck bed was stacked with camping gear, jerky, and enough coffee to fuel an army. We'd been making this drive so long that neither of us spoke much. The forest felt like an old friend we didn't need to impress anymore. Setting up camp went by muscle memory. Dad built the fire ring, while I set up the tent and strung our food supplies high between 2 oaks, out of reach of black bears. The woods were quiet, except for the distant trickle of the creek. By sunset, everything was in place. Dad poured 2 cups of instant coffee and said, "Tomorrow, we'll head toward the eastern ridge. I saw a sign there last time. Big buck tracks." He always talked about sign, tracks, rubs, droppings, like they were clues left by some clever rival. I just nodded and smiled. That was his way of saying he was excited. We turned in early, the forest humming softly beyond the tent walls. Somewhere far off, an owl called. It was the kind of silence that made the rest of the world feel imaginary. Saturday morning came crisp and colorless. Frost sparkled on the grass, and our breath hung in the air. We followed a narrow trail that cut between tall firs, the kind of path deer had probably used for generations. By noon, we'd scouted several good spots. Around 3 p.m., Dad suggested splitting up. Same plan we'd used for years. He'd take the ridge stand, an old wooden platform about 15 feet up a poplar tree with clear sight lines. I'd position myself downhill, near a cluster of cedars overlooking a shallow creek. We agreed on the same signals as always. 2 short whistle blasts meant, "Good shot, stay put." 1 long one meant, "Come quick." As the sun dipped, the air turned colder. The forest dimmed from gold to gray, and that special kind of stillness fell. The one hunters call the hush before dusk. I sat perfectly still, my rifle across my knees, listening. The wind whispered through the branches. A squirrel scurried somewhere behind me. Then, a sound that didn't belong. A deliberate crunch of leaves. Slow, heavy. I lifted my scope and scanned the clearing ahead. Through the thinning light, movement caught my eye. The careful steps of a massive buck, maybe 8 points, its coat rippling with muscle beneath the dim glow. It stepped into the open, nostrils flaring. I steadied my breath the way Dad taught me. Exhale slow. Squeeze. Don't pull. The shot cracked through the valley like thunder. The buck leapt once, then bolted into the trees. I heard the crashing fade into nothing. 2 short whistles echoed from Dad's direction. Good shot. Wait 30 minutes. I smiled, heart pounding. I'd done this dozens of times, but it never lost its thrill. When Dad joined me, night was already creeping in. He clapped my shoulder, proud grin beneath his weathered face. We found the first blood drops easily. Bright red and frothy, a lung hit. "Clean shot," Dad said, shining his flashlight. "He won't have gone far." We followed the trail deeper into the woods. The scent of iron hung faintly in the air. The ground sloped downward, soft with moss and fallen needles. About 80 yards in, I spotted something ahead. A shape near a fallen pine. "There," I whispered. But as we got closer, my steps faltered. The buck was there, but wrong. Its body had been dragged several feet off the blood trail, deep grooves carved into the dirt like something had pulled it by the neck. The belly cavity was open, not cut, but torn, ragged edges glistening in the flashlight beam. Steam still rose from the carcass. Whatever had done this had done it minutes ago. "Bear?" I asked, though I already knew better. Dad crouched, eyes narrowing. No bear I ever seen takes the organs like that, and leaves the rest untouched. The liver, heart, and intestines, gone. Not scattered, not chewed, just gone. The woods were dead silent. Not even the insects sang. That's when something, a sound, brushed against the quiet. A whisper, soft, breathless, right behind the fallen pine. "Leave it." I froze. Dad swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Just trees, shadows, and that faint mist curling off the ground. We stood still for maybe 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes. Then the woods shifted again. A faint step, deliberate and slow, crunching leaves just beyond the beam. "Back up," Dad said quietly. Nice and easy. We began retreating toward the trail, rifles raised, every sense screaming. Then we heard it again, clearer this time. That same low, gravelly whisper, but closer. It's mine. I don't think my father had ever been truly afraid before that moment. But I saw it, the way his hands trembled slightly on the flashlight. The footsteps began to circle us. Slow, calculated, branches snapping, leaves crunching in measured rhythm. Dad flicked his phone on. No signal. The pale glow of the screen only made the shadows seem thicker. Then, from somewhere just beyond the edge of the light, I saw 2 points of reflection. Eyes. Not animal eyes. Too far apart. Too high. 7, maybe 8 feet up. They blinked once, then vanished. "Move," Dad said, barely a whisper. "Now." We started down the path toward camp, fast but controlled. The sound followed us, sometimes behind, sometimes beside. Always close. Then came the voice again, low and stretched, like it didn't belong to a throat built for speech. "Mine. Mine. Mine." Dad fired a warning shot into the darkness. The echo rolled across the valley, then silence. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We ran. Branches tore at my jacket. Roots snagged my boots. Behind us, something large moved through the brush, keeping pace effortlessly. I didn't dare look back. We burst into camp, gasping, hearts pounding. Dad tossed his rifle in the truck bed, shouting, "Go! Go!" I threw our gear in after it. Tent, lantern, didn't matter what got left behind. The headlights flared on, slicing through the trees. And that's when I saw it. For half a heartbeat, it stepped into the beam. Tall, maybe 7 feet. Arms hanging low like they were too long for its body. Its skin was pale, stretched over bones that didn't fit right. Its face was almost human, but warped, as if someone had taken a normal face and pulled it forward until it split at the edges. Its mouth opened, far too wide. "Mine." Dad slammed the gas. The truck fishtailed on the dirt road before catching traction, tires spitting gravel. We didn't stop until the forest was just a smear of darkness behind us. We reached the main road around midnight. Neither of us spoke for nearly an hour, the silence heavier than the engine's hum. At a diner 2 towns over, under the safe glow of fluorescent lights, Dad finally said, "We don't tell your mother." "Ever," I nodded. The next morning, he called Mr. Lambert, said we'd had a family emergency and had to leave early. Apologized for leaving the campsite a mess. Lambert said no problem, his nephew would check on it next month. We never went back. A few weeks later, Dad sold his rifle. Said hunting didn't feel right anymore. I kept mine, though it hasn't left the safe since. For months, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I went through local archives, old newspaper scans, even state land records. I found a few old missing persons cases, hunters mostly, between 1951 and 1969. Bodies never recovered. Locals blamed the terrain. But there was something else. An 1887 county survey of the Dawson Hollow region had a note scrawled in the margins beside the eastern boundary line, right where we'd hunted. Greater than land left unclaimed, marked by old settlers as taken ground, boundaries not to be crossed. No one explained what taken ground meant, but I didn't need to. Last spring, I had to drive through that part of the state for work. I told myself I wouldn't look, but curiosity wins over fear sometimes. Around midday, I passed the dirt road that led toward the Lambert property. The sign was still there, half buried in vines, pointing toward the woods. For a second, I slowed. The trees beyond the turn were motionless, silent. And then, in the reflection of my windshield, I swore I saw something pale between the trunks, tall, still, and watching. I didn't stop, didn't even blink until the forest was gone behind me. Dad and I still talk sometimes about those trips, but never that one. He just says, some things in those woods ain't meant for men to take. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I think about that voice, that whisper that didn't sound quite human. Leave it. It's mine, and I wonder if it's still there, waiting for the next hunter who takes something from land that doesn't belong to them. Because deep down, I know this much. We didn't just stumble into its territory that night. We took what belonged to it, and it let us live only long enough to remember that. I never wanted to go on that damn trip. If I'm honest, the idea of hiking with my co-workers already sounded like punishment, not team building. It started 2 weeks ago in the stale conference room of our Richmond office, with the air conditioner humming too loud, and the HR rep reading from a PowerPoint about repairing trust within the workplace. We were all there because of the complaints, anonymous of course, about the toxic atmosphere in our department. That's when Daniel from logistics came up with his brilliant idea. He said, we should do something outdoors, something real. No screens, no meetings, just us, reconnecting. I laughed at first, but nobody else did. Even Ruth, who barely spoke to anyone unless it was about a budget report, nodded along like he'd just solved world peace. Liam, the new guy from Seattle, clapped his hands together and said it sounded fun. That should have been my first warning. We met at the trailhead on a Saturday morning in early fall. The drive took nearly 4 hours. Endless twisting roads bordered by orange and red leaves that looked pretty until you realized there was no cell service for miles. The group was small. Daniel, Ruth, Liam, and me, Aaron. Daniel showed up wearing a huge tactical-style backpack, like we were going to survive the apocalypse instead of a weekend in the mountains. Ruth kept checking her phone for a signal even though we all knew there wouldn't be any. And Liam, with that overly positive energy that only new employees have, kept talking about how fresh the air feels. The Blue Ridge Trail Loop, that's what Daniel called it, said he found it online and that it wasn't too tough. We'll hike 5 miles in, camp overnight, and come back out before noon Sunday, he'd said. The morning was crisp, and for the first 2 hours, everything went fine. We talked about nothing. Sports, weather, office gossip, anything but the incident that had gotten us all in trouble. It almost felt normal. Then, just as the sun started climbing over the ridgeline, Daniel stopped. To our left, the main trail continued up a gentle slope, clearly marked with bright orange paint on the trees. To the right, there was something else. A narrow track, half covered in fallen leaves, winding down between the trees. Daniel pulled out his phone and said, "According to this app, this path connects back to the main trail after 3 miles. It'll save us a ton of time." Ruth immediately frowned. "That's not on the map," she said. "If it's not marked, it's not safe." Daniel smiled. That smug, managerial smile of his that always made you feel stupid for disagreeing. "It's fine, Ruth. These trails overlap all the time. Locals use them. It's probably an old ranger path," Liam chimed in. "Yeah, it might be cool to see something less touristy." I didn't like it. The woods already felt different there. Quieter, heavier somehow. But I didn't want to be the one who complained. So I said nothing when Daniel turned right and started walking. The first hour wasn't bad. The air grew cooler as we descended, and the trees got taller, older, with thick trunks wrapped in moss. Every so often, Daniel pointed out little bits of string tied to branches and said, "See? Trail markers." But after a while, those stopped showing up. The ground got soft, muddy in places, and the path split into smaller tracks that twisted in every direction. Ruth started muttering about losing daylight. Liam stopped talking altogether. I noticed Daniel checking his phone more and more, holding it close to his chest like a lifeline. The battery icon glowed red. "Still good?" I asked. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "Just another mile." But his eyes said otherwise. By 3 p.m., we'd been hiking nearly 6 hours. The forest canopy was so thick that it felt like dusk already. I couldn't hear any birds, not even the sound of wind, just the crunch of our boots and the faint rhythm of our breathing. It was Ruth who finally said what we were all thinking. "Daniel, you've gotten us lost." He spun on her. "No, the GPS says we're right on track." "Let me see it," she said. He hesitated, then turned the screen toward us. The blue dot flickered, jumping erratically back and forth across the map, like it couldn't decide where we were. That's when the phone died. The argument was immediate and vicious. Ruth accused Daniel of leading us into the middle of nowhere just to play hero. Daniel snapped that she was paranoid and impossible to work with, just like in the office. Liam tried to calm them down, but that only made it worse. Voices got louder. The air between us felt sharp, and that's when I saw it. Something, or someone, moved behind the trees. Just a flicker of motion, maybe 20 or 30 feet away. A patch of red fabric, like a jacket sleeve, vanishing behind the trunk of an oak. I froze. "Did you guys see that?" I asked. Nobody answered. They were too busy yelling. When I turned back, it was gone. We made camp in the first clearing we could find. A patch of flattened earth surrounded by crooked birch trees. It didn't feel right, but the light was fading too fast to care. Everyone went quiet as we unpacked. Ruth blew her emergency whistle a few times, in case someone's nearby. But the sound only made the silence afterward worse. Dinner was dry protein bars and jerky eaten under the dim light of our flashlights. Nobody talked. Daniel finally broke the silence. "I think the GPS was glitching," he said softly. "It's happened before in older forests." Magnetic interference. I wanted to believe him, but the way the woods pressed in around us made my skin crawl. That night, I barely slept. Every sound felt too close. The rustle of leaves, the snapping of a twig, something brushing the side of my tent. At one point, I heard a low humming sound, like someone softly singing just out of earshot. I whispered Daniel's name. No reply. When I unzipped my tent and looked out, there was nothing. Just shadows stretching between the trees. At dawn, Ruth was already up, standing near the fire pit with a blank expression. "Where's Liam?" she asked. His tent was open, sleeping bag still inside. His backpack was gone. We searched the immediate area, calling for him until our voices went hoarse. No response, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing. Then Ruth found something half buried near his tent, his phone. When she powered it on using her charger, there was a recording. The audio was mostly static, but in between, you could hear footsteps, slow and heavy, circling the camp. Then Liam's voice whispered, "Who's there?" A pause, then a faint laugh, high-pitched, almost childish, before the recording cut out. We all listened in silence. Daniel's hands were shaking when he said, "We have to move." Now we packed what little we had left and started walking, fast. Nobody spoke. Every few minutes I glanced over my shoulder, sure I'd see that red fabric again. Around midday, Daniel stopped suddenly. He was staring at something carved into a tree trunk. The words were fresh, cut deep into the bark. Turn back too late. Ruth started crying softly. That's when we heard it. The humming again. Closer this time. All around us. Daniel grabbed my arm. "Run!" We did. Branches tore at our clothes as we stumbled through the undergrowth. I didn't care which direction we went, only that it was away from that sound. At some point, Ruth fell. I turned back, but Daniel yanked me forward, shouting, "Don't stop!" When we finally broke through the trees and saw the bright orange trail markers again, I nearly collapsed. We didn't stop running until we reached the parking lot. Only our cars were there, except one more. An old brown van I didn't remember seeing before. Its back doors were slightly open. Inside were camping supplies, rope, gas canisters, and something that looked like torn fabric. Red fabric. Daniel slammed his car door shut. "We're leaving," he said. We called the police once we got to town. They searched for 3 weeks and never found anything. Not Liam, not our campsite, not even the tree with the message. They said he probably got lost or fell somewhere. But I know what I heard that night. That humming wasn't an animal. And I still hear it sometimes, faintly when I'm half asleep, like it's waiting for me to come back. Idaho in early spring doesn't ease you back into the wild. It just drops you into it. That morning, the air still smelled faintly of snowmelt and pine sap, sharp and cold enough to sting your lungs. I'd driven out before sunrise, heading east from Lewiston, toward a bend in the Clearwater River that most people had stopped fishing years ago. The spot's hard to find now. The dirt road that leads in barely qualifies as a road, more like a forgotten scar winding through cedar and tamarack, with ruts deep enough to swallow a tire if you aren't paying attention. Most folks say it's not worth the trouble, but I've been chasing trout since my college days. My old roommate Tyler got me hooked back when we both studied wildlife biology at the University of Idaho. That was 15 years ago, and I've been fly fishing ever since. Clearwater Bend became my ritual, my reset button whenever city life started grinding me down. It takes effort to get there. After the dirt road ends, you've got to park and hike the last half mile through brush, thick with wild rose and serviceberry. The ground's slick with spring runoff, and you'll get scraped up unless you're careful. But the reward, the way that clear, cold water flashes over smooth stones and the trout rise hungry from the shadows, always makes it worth it. That morning felt perfect. The river was alive, running full and fast from snowmelt up in the Bitterroots. By noon, I'd landed 3 good-sized cutthroats, lost one that felt huge, and was standing midstream when it happened. I was casting into a deep eddy where the current curved hard against a granite shelf. The sun hit the surface just right, so bright I could see the fish flashing under the ripples. Then, movement caught my eye. Across the river, in the shadow of a tall pine, someone stood watching me. At first, I figured it was another fisherman. The Clearwater's remote, but not impossible to reach. Maybe someone had come in from the other side. I lifted my hand, the standard friendly wave between anglers, who've both worked hard to find a spot. The man didn't move. He just stood there, maybe 50 or 60 feet away, half hidden behind the pine. His clothes were wrong, hanging off him like wet rags, the color a dull, muddy gray that blended into the bank. He wasn't holding a rod. He wasn't doing anything at all, just staring. For a while, I tried to ignore him. People get weird in the backcountry. Sometimes they want to be alone, same as me. So I kept fishing. But after a few casts, I realized he hadn't shifted an inch. Not to scratch, not to look away. He was so still it didn't feel right. That uneasy tickle started in the back of my neck, the one you get when you know you're being watched. After a while, I moved upstream, following the shallower run toward another pool. I told myself the guy would either leave or I'd lose sight of him through the trees. But every time I looked across, there he was, matching my pace. He glided through the underbrush with this strange smoothness never tripping or brushing branches aside. The river's roar covered most sounds, but I swear I never heard him step once. At one point, I tried calling out, "You all right over there?" But my voice felt small, swallowed by the wind and water. He didn't answer. By early afternoon, the sun dipped behind a ridge, and the forest started to cool fast. That's when I got my first clear look at him. The trees thinned, and I could see his face, or what was left of it. His skin looked gray under the dirt, stretched tight across sharp bones. His hair was plastered to his skull, tangled with what looked like green weeds or moss. His eyes, I'll never forget those, were a cloudy, washed-out blue, like glass that had been left underwater too long. His mouth hung open slightly, showing teeth that looked chipped and brown. I froze mid-cast. He didn't blink, didn't even flinch when a branch snapped under his foot. When I looked away for a second to reel in my line, then looked back, he'd moved closer. 10 feet closer, maybe more. That was when I noticed his feet. Bare, mud-caked, cracked and raw-looking, with nails so long they curled over the ends of his toes. I told myself he was probably some homeless guy, or a hermit. Maybe he lived out here. There were stories of drifters in the Idaho backcountry, ex-military, survivalists, people who'd gone off-grid. But there was something wrong with how he moved. Too steady, too sure. Like gravity didn't quite apply to him the same way. I hooked another fish, a rainbow this time, big and strong. The fight pulled my focus for a minute. I could feel it thrashing in the current, that electric vibration through the line. But when I lifted my eyes to check across the water, he was standing at the edge. Closer now. Too close. He stepped into the river. The Clearwater's current is brutal that time of year. Waist-deep water can knock a grown man down easy. But he didn't struggle. He just walked in. No hesitation, no bracing against the current. The water surged around him, but his body stayed perfectly upright as he waded deeper. At one point, the current slammed against his chest, hard enough to send logs spinning downstream, and he didn't even sway. His eyes stayed locked on mine the whole time, unblinking, cold, and hollow. I froze. My legs wouldn't move. My brain was screaming at me to run, but something about that steady stare pinned me in place. When he got within 20 feet, I could smell him. That sweet, rotting odor of decay mixed with wet moss and river muck. That's when his mouth opened wider, not to speak, just to gape like something unhinged. The sound that came out wasn't human. It was a deep, wet gurgle, like air bubbling through mud. He stopped in the middle of the river, about 10 feet from me, and bent down. His hand disappeared beneath the water for a moment, then came up holding something. A trout. Or what used to be one. It was half decayed, the scales sloughing off in patches, eyes clouded white. He lifted it slowly, then bit into it. Raw. The crunch echoed over the water. Bits of flesh and blood slid down his chin and mixed with the mud smeared across his neck. He chewed with his mouth open, staring at me the whole time. That broke whatever hold he had over me. I turned and stumbled backward, slipping on slick stones. My waders filled with icy water as I splashed toward the bank, lungs burning. I could hear him moving behind me, heavy, rhythmic splashes cutting through the river's roar. I didn't look back. The brush tore at my sleeves and face as I fought through it. My rod snagged on a branch, and I let it go. Didn't even care. I just needed distance. The trail back to the truck felt 10 times longer than before. My boots squelched with every step, and my legs ached from the weight of my soaked gear. But I could still hear him. Not close. Not exactly behind me, but somewhere parallel, keeping pace through the woods. The occasional snap of a branch, the whisper of leaves. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw the silver glint of my truck in the clearing, I nearly cried from relief. My hands shook so bad, I dropped the keys twice before I got the door open. Just as I turned the ignition, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. He was standing at the edge of the trees, about 30 yards back, perfectly still. In his hand, he held that same dead trout. Or maybe another one. Hard to tell. Then he smiled, just barely. His cracked lips pulled into a shape that didn't look natural on his face. I slammed the truck into gear and tore down the dirt road, bouncing over rocks and roots until the forest finally disappeared behind me. I stopped at the first gas station I found, a lonely place at a crossroads near Orofino. The kid at the counter gave me a strange look when I walked in, dripping wet. Mud streaked across my face. He asked if I was all right. I told him I'd fallen in the river, which wasn't a total lie. As I drank my coffee in the parking lot, trying to stop my hands from shaking, I kept thinking about those eyes. That blank, hollow look that didn't belong to any living person. A few days later, I mentioned it to a local guide at the fly shop in town, careful to sound casual. Told him I'd seen some strange guy near the bend. He went quiet for a long time before saying, "You were fishing Clearwater Bend, weren't you?" I nodded. He sighed. "You're not the first. Every couple of years, someone comes in talking about a man down there. Always the same story. Quiet, dirty, barefoot. Always near the river." He leaned closer then, his voice low. "They say there was a flood about 20 years back. Took out half a campground upriver. One of the bodies was never recovered. Local legend says he never really left. I haven't been back since. I fish with a partner now. Always. No matter how clear the water or how strong the bite, I stay away from that bend. Because sometimes, when the wind comes off the river just right, I still swear I can smell that same rotten mix of water, mud, and death. And somewhere deep inside me, I know, whatever that thing was, it wasn't done watching." My name's Eli Parker. I've been driving trucks for close to 20 years now. Long enough to know the roads most people don't even realize exist. I've hauled through blizzards, flash floods, and mountain passes so tight, you swear the trailer would peel off like a soda can. But the one thing that still keeps me up sometimes isn't the weather or the wrecks. It's that night outside Black Hollow, West Virginia. That route wasn't supposed to happen. It was late March, cold, but not quite freezing. My dispatcher, Dale, called me around 9 p.m., asking if I could run a last-minute load of heating equipment to a small supply yard on the Virginia border. "Easy run," he said. 2 hours tops if you stick to Route 19. It was supposed to be a straight shot down the interstate. But 2 hours into the drive, just past Beckley, traffic came to a dead stop. I rolled down my window and saw a sea of red taillights. A state trooper was walking from truck to truck, telling drivers there'd been a major wreck ahead, oil spill, multiple semis involved. The road would be shut down for hours. I pulled off at the next exit, which dumped me at a half-lit gas station off a county road, the kind of place that hadn't updated its pumps since the 80s. Inside, behind a scratched plexiglass counter, an old man with a crooked baseball cap looked up from his newspaper. "Interstate's closed, huh?" he rasped. "Yeah," I said. "Any way around it?" "I've got to drop before sunrise." He thought for a second, then jabbed a nicotine-stained finger toward a paper map taped to the wall. "You could take Black Hollow Road," he said. "Cuts through the ridge and meets 220 on the other side. Save you an hour if you don't mind the mountain bends." I should have known better. Every driver knows that shortcuts through the Appalachian hills are a gamble, especially at night. But my load wasn't heavy, and I figured if I took it slow, I'd be fine. That's how I ended up turning down a narrow, twisting blacktop road with no center line, the trees pressing in close like a tunnel. It was after midnight, the kind of hour when the world feels paused between one breath and the next. The high beams carved out maybe 30 feet ahead before the darkness swallowed everything again. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the CB mic, though there wasn't a single other voice on the radio. Every so often, the forest would open up to a small meadow or a dirt lane disappearing into nowhere. No houses, no lights, just the hiss of my tires and the low hum of the engine. The deeper I went, the heavier the air got. There's a stillness in those hollows that's different from quiet. It feels thick, like sound itself doesn't travel right. I passed a faded sign that read, "Black Hollow, 7 miles." The letters were so worn you could barely make them out. Then something moved. It happened quick, a flicker of motion along the ditch line, maybe 50 yards ahead. My first thought was a deer. I slowed down, easing my foot onto the brake. But when the lights caught her, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was a woman. She was crouched near the edge of the road, one hand pressed to the ground, her hair long and tangled, hanging forward so I couldn't see her face. She looked small, maybe mid-20s, barefoot, wearing what looked like a pale dress smeared with mud. At first, I thought she might have been hurt. Maybe her car had gone off the road. I slowed to a stop, the gravel crunching under the tires, and rolled down the window. "You okay, ma'am?" I called out. No movement. She just stayed there, frozen, like she hadn't heard me at all. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was deep enough to make your ears ring. The only sound was the ticking of my cooling engine and the soft rustle of branches in the wind. I stepped down from the cab and pulled out my flashlight. "Ma'am, you hurt? You need a ride." That's when she turned her head. Her face was pale, too pale, even in the beam of the flashlight. Her eyes were wide and glassy, staring straight at me like she didn't understand what she was seeing. Before I could say another word, she bolted. No scream, no crunch of leaves, just gone. 1 second she was there, and the next, she'd melted into the trees like smoke. I called out again, louder this time, but the forest swallowed my voice whole. After a minute of standing there, flashlight sweeping over the undergrowth, I told myself she was probably scared. Maybe drunk, maybe high, maybe both. Either way, she didn't want help. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and told myself to forget it. But as I started rolling again, I couldn't shake the image of those eyes. Empty, lost, like she'd forgotten how to be human. An hour later, I reached a small crossroads town. Nothing but a gas station, a motel, and a 24-hour diner with buzzing neon lights that said, "Eats." I pulled in mostly to calm my nerves. Inside, the place smelled like old coffee and fried bacon. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that said, "Darlene poured me a cup before I even sat down." "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said with a half smile. "Something like that," I muttered, then told her what happened. How I saw a woman crouched by the road, how she ran when I tried to help. Darlene's smile faded. She exchanged a look with the cook behind the counter. "You were on Black Hollow Road, weren't you?" she asked quietly. "Yeah. You know it?" "Everyone around here does," she said. "People go missing out that way. Hikers, campers. Couple years back, a school teacher disappeared driving home that same route. They never found her car, just her purse in the ditch." I tried to laugh it off, but the way she said it, flat, Not dramatic, just matter of fact. Made my stomach twist. By the time I made my drop-off at the Virginia yard, dawn was just brushing over the ridges. For a few moments, the fog and the light made the world feel normal again. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But the next morning, when I checked my phone, a local news alert popped up. Sheriff's Department investigating possible crime scene near Black Hollow Road. The photo in the article stopped me cold. It showed the same stretch of road I'd stopped on, the same tree line, the same shallow ditch. The caption mentioned drag marks found in the mud and evidence of a possible struggle. No name, no body, just a torn piece of faded fabric caught on a branch. I just sat there, staring at that photo, feeling the same heavy quiet from the woods pressing in again. A month passed. I kept driving other routes, but I couldn't get that night out of my head. Then one Tuesday, I got another route, this time hauling equipment down toward Roanoke. The GPS told me to cut through the same county again. I almost refused it. But work's work. It was midday when I reached that familiar stretch of road. In the daylight, it looked harmless. Just another narrow mountain lane winding between the trees. But as I rounded a bend, I saw something new. A small wooden cross stood near the ditch. No name, no flowers, just a strip of faded fabric tied around it. The same pale color I'd seen in the flashlight beam that night. I pulled over without meaning to, heart hammering. Stepping out of the cab, I walked closer. The wood was weathered, hand-carved, and at its base, someone had left a smooth river stone with initials scratched into it. E.M., I don't know why, but I whispered, "I'm sorry," under my breath, like it mattered. That night, I parked my rig at a rest stop about 5 miles from town. I couldn't sleep. The hum of distant highway traffic faded until it was just the creak of the cab and the whistle of wind through the trees. Then, sometime after 3 a.m., I heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap against the trailer door. At first I thought it was the wind, but then it came again, slow, deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down, boots crunching on gravel. The air was heavy, the kind that smells like rain and metal. I swept the beam along the trailer's edge. Nothing. Then, movement, just at the tree line. A shape. Small. Crouched. When the light hit it, the figure jerked away fast, slipping between the trees. The hair, the dress, the way she moved. It was her. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "What do you want?" But the forest didn't answer. Just the faint hiss of leaves. I backed up slowly, keeping the flashlight steady until I was back in the cab. I locked the doors and sat there until the sky started to lighten. When dawn finally broke, I climbed out again, just to make sure I hadn't lost my mind. That's when I saw them. Small, bare footprints pressed into the dirt, leading from the edge of the woods straight to my trailer door. They stopped right beneath the handle, then turned back toward the forest. I never reported it. I didn't see the point. Who would believe me? I stopped taking runs through that part of the state. I even changed dispatchers a few months later, just to be sure. But every once in a while, I'll find myself passing near those hills again, driving the interstate above Black Hollow. And sometimes, if it's late enough and the fog rolls in thick, I'll see a break in the trees below, a pale glint near the ditch, just for a moment, like someone's still waiting by the roadside, looking for headlights in the dark. And I keep driving, always, because I know if I stop again, she won't just vanish this time. The back roads around my town turned silent after dusk. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, the kind that hums in your ears, making every distant rustle sound closer than it should. That night, The air was unusually cold for mid-October. I was riding my motorcycle down one of those narrow, unpaved roads that cut through the pine woods like veins. Damp dirt beneath the tires, fog weaving between the trees. My friend Caleb had called me just an hour earlier, his voice tight with worry. His dog, a brown shepherd named Rufus, had bolted into the woods chasing after something and hadn't come back. He lived about 6 miles out of town, near an old mill road that no one really used anymore. I told him I'd meet him halfway, figuring we'd find the dog tangled in brush or sitting somewhere spooked. I didn't know then that it would be the last normal phone call I'd ever have with Caleb. The fog hung low as I rode, creeping across the road in soft waves. My headlight cut through it just enough to show the outlines of trees leaning in from both sides. Every few seconds, I'd catch glimpses of something pale flashing between trunks. Probably fog, I told myself, or maybe deer eyes reflecting back at me. The road was quiet except for the low hum of my bike and the crunch of gravel under the tires. My GPS on the handlebar showed a blue line curving through endless green, nothing but woods on both sides. About 20 minutes in, I slowed down near a bend where the trees pressed so close together that they almost formed a tunnel. That's when I heard it. A crack, sharp and sudden, somewhere behind me. I stopped the bike, turned off the engine. The silence that followed was thick and alive. My own breathing felt too loud. I lifted my helmet slightly, letting the cold air touch my face. Another sound came, this time slower, like deliberate steps pressing into dry leaves. I turned in the direction of the noise, scanning the shadows with my flashlight. The beam caught on something pale. Not bark, not mist. Something smooth. Then it shifted. Every muscle in my body tensed. "Rufus," I called out. My voice cracked, sounding wrong in that silence. Nothing. The shape vanished between the trees. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I started the bike again and pushed hard toward Caleb's place, refusing to check my mirrors. The air grew colder the closer I got, the mist thicker, until finally, a faint yellow glow broke through ahead. The porch light. Caleb was already outside when I pulled up, a flashlight in hand, wearing a flannel over his hoodie. His eyes were wide, scanning the tree line. "Did you see him?" he asked immediately. "No," I said, "but something's out there." He swallowed hard. "I heard barking by the creek earlier, then nothing. Just stopped all at once." We decided to split up. He'd check the front yard. I'd search the tree line behind the property. The trees looked different there, closer together, almost unnatural. The fog gathered thick at the roots, curling like smoke. I moved my flashlight slowly, beams sweeping through trunks. Every sound, every crunch of a twig, echoed like it came from everywhere at once. Then I heard it again. A snap of wood, followed by the low rustle of something big shifting between the trees. I froze. It wasn't the sound of an animal running. It was heavier, more cautious, like it knew I was there. "Caleb," I called, my voice low. No answer. Then I heard it. Breathing. Long, uneven, dragging breaths that rasped through the cold air like someone forcing air through a cracked throat. My light caught on something tall. Way taller than a man. A hunched silhouette half concealed behind a tree trunk. The skin, if that's what it was, looked grayish and stretched tight. The texture of damp paper. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping on a root. My flashlight flickered. "Caleb!" I shouted again, running toward the house. He was standing on the porch, staring into the same patch of woods. I gasped out what I'd seen, but he shook his head. "It's probably a deer," he said, though his voice trembled. Then, jingle. A collar. Somewhere in the dark. Rufus barked. Once. Then again. But the second bark sounded wrong. Deep, ragged, like it came from something forcing sound through its chest. Caleb's face drained of color. He stepped down from the porch, calling for the dog, and I followed him even though every nerve in my body screamed not to. We moved through the yard, the fog curling around our legs. The barking stopped. Then, silence. No crickets. No wind. Just that suffocating stillness. We stood there for a long time before heading back inside. Caleb locked the door, deadbolt and all, and we just sat in the living room, both of us pretending we weren't scared. I left about an hour later, forcing a calm goodbye, even though my hands were still shaking on the handlebars. The next day, Caleb called. He said Rufus hadn't come home. His voice sounded strange, quieter, as if he hadn't slept. He said he'd checked his outdoor camera, and there was something on it that he needed me to see. I drove over that evening. The TV in his living room was paused on a grainy camera feed showing his porch. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. He hit play. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Just the porch light flickering, fog rolling past the yard. Then, from the edge of the screen, something moved. A shape. It stepped slowly into the light. It was tall. Too tall. Its head nearly brushing the porch roof. Its body looked thin, the limbs long and wrong, as though the bones underneath were stretched. The moment the light hit it, the screen flickered, distorting like static. When the image cleared, it was gone. Caleb rewound the clip, his fingers trembling. We watched it again, and again. No face, just a pale blur where one should be. The way it stood, slightly turned toward the camera, made my stomach drop, like it knew it was being watched. Then came the sound. At first, faint. A slow, steady breathing. But it wasn't coming from the porch. It came from inside the house, from behind the camera. The recording ended the instant the porch light went out. Caleb sat still, staring at the frozen frame. That light, he whispered, burned out that night. We went outside anyway, even though every cell in my body screamed not to. The bulb wasn't burnt. It was just unscrewed, half loose in its socket, swinging slightly in the breeze. Behind the yard, the woods stood dark and silent. No insects, no birds. Just that cold, unbreathing quiet. When Caleb turned the bulb tight again, the porch lit up in a harsh yellow glow, and just before it flickered steady, I saw it. Something pale shifted between the trees, there for only a second, then gone. A week later, Caleb was gone too. He didn't say goodbye, didn't post online, just vanished. His house still stands there, empty at the end of that dirt road. But people in town say sometimes, on cold nights when the fog rolls down from the ridge, the porch light flicks on by itself. And if you wait long enough, you can see a tall shadow standing just beyond the trees. I haven't gone back. But sometimes, when I'm riding home late at night, my headlights catch the edge of the forest, and I swear I can feel it. Something out there, already watching.